Iran has briefly closed the strategically important Strait of Hormuz after a second round of nuclear talks with the US wrapped up in Geneva, seemingly without any major breakthroughs. Our America's editor, John Lyons, is following this story closely and joins us. John, what's come of these talks today?
Well, Gemma, this was the second round of indirect talks between the United States and Iran, which are being brokered by Oman. These were in Geneva, and neither side said much afterwards. Both gave certain positive sort of suggestions that progress had been made. The Americans are saying that they want the Iranians to come back within 2 weeks with specific plans as to what they will do. That the centrepiece of these negotiations is the nuclear program. The United States is saying that Iran must essentially close down its nuclear program and have no enriched uranium. The Israelis are now adding to that and saying they want the Americans to push for an end to all ballistic missiles inside Iran, both the holding of them and the making of them. And Israel is also pushing for an end to any proxy influence through the region. It appears Iran's prepared to try to do a deal on the nuclear program. They did one with President Barack Obama earlier, and it looks like President Trump's trying to get a similar deal to the one he tore up in his first term. However, there is haggling over those other aspects.
What do you think the likelihood of US military action against Iran is now?
Well, Gemma, I think the likelihood, it's more likely than not. I think it's greater than 50%. You can see the sort of the drumbeats happening here. The US has deployed the aircraft carrier, the strike group, the USS Abraham Lincoln, to the region. They're now considering or deploying the USS Gerald R. Ford, which is the largest aircraft carrier in the world. Massive gathering of firepower. And I think that Donald Trump has decided that a strike on certain military assets inside Iran of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps plus the besieging militia really has no downside politically for him. Israel, the leader here of Israel was only a few days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu, certainly egging that on. And I think the Americans will probably end up doing what they say they want, but also with Israel pushing them to do it as well.
What about Iran briefly closing the Strait of Hormuz? Is that likely to deter the Trump administration?
Strategically, it's probably the silliest and the worst thing that the Iranians could possibly do. I've been in that part of the world on a US aircraft carrier, the USS John C. Stennis, a few years ago. And the entire role of the USS John C. Stennis at that point was to ensure that the Strait of Hormuz stays open. The Strait of Hormuz is obviously crucial to the global oil supply. The idea that the Iranians are facing the greatest military force in human history and they are talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz is basically sticking a finger in the eye of Donald Trump. If they do, and I don't think they've closed it yet, that would cause a major international global crisis in terms of energy. I think if the Iranians try to do that, it will last 5 minutes. It will be the strategically most stupid thing they could possibly do. I know they're huffing and puffing and talking about it. The difficulty too is with Iran, you have, like the foreign minister and others are at their talks in Geneva, but at the end of the day, the person who calls the shots in Iran, just like the person who calls the shots here, is President Trump, and President Trump alone. The person who calls the shots in Iran is the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei. And as Marco Rubio said the other day, I think quite accurately, that these decisions by the Supreme Leader are being made on theological grounds rather than geopolitical grounds.
And what does all of this mean for the regime in Iran?
The regime is under huge pressure anyway. About 70% of Iranians were not born when the so-called Islamic Revolution happened in 1979. So the pictures we see of the people dressed in black chanting death to America, death to Israel, they are in the minority. I've been to Iran 3 times. They are not typical Iranians, but they're the people in power. The younger Iranians, generally the ones I spoke to, do not want a theological government. They do not want the old world ayatollahs telling them what they can and can't do, particularly the young women of Iran, are the ones who are leading this uprising we saw only a few weeks ago. So I think that longer term, this regime is going to find it very difficult to survive. But in the short term, as we saw only a few weeks ago, they're going to use absolute brute force to try to stay in power.